everlasting challenge of creating the continuous supply chain. That's the subject of my conversation today with Bernard Goor. He is Senior Vice President of Sales with Infor. Bernard, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Really appreciate having a chance to chat with you for a few minutes.
Let's define terms to start with, shall we? How do you define the continuous supply chain?
That's a very good question. So for us, the continuous, as the name implies, the continuous supply chains means a supply chain that is uninterrupted and real time. So to deliver a continuous supply chain, you need to be able to connect the dots between the multiple nodes and multiple tiers in the supply chain and make sure they can share digital information in real time. Now, as you know, there's obviously in the past 30 years, there's been a lot of supply chains that have been built, but they've been built on point-to-point integrations between islands of information, which means they are essentially discontinuous. The only way to make them continuous is by bringing all those islands of information together by connecting them to a single version of the truth in real time. And allow them to then, by sharing information digitally in real time, be able to optimize the entire supply chain across all nodes and across all modes. That's what we mean by the continuous supply chain.
Is it possible to generalize where the biggest gaps are in supply chains today, where that becomes most difficult? Where are the nodes that are toughest to put together? Where are the so-called black holes of information? Where do things slow down and disappear? Any particular place where that seems to happen the most?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question because we see that the problem, Bob, is not in a particular node or particular tier. The problem is that it's the very structure of the supply chain that is causing the problems we're facing today. When you think about, again, a traditional supply chain, think about a buyer, a seller, and carriers interacting together across multiple nodes. Every company in the supply chain is its own version of supply chain systems and its own version of supply chain systems, which means that every company has its own version of the truth across the entire supply chain. So when you look at a myriad of companies, buyers, sellers, distributors, carriers, all having their own single version of the truth within their own four walls, what do you have? You have fragmented data. You have different views of the data, different forecasts, different supply plans, which essentially breaks down the supply chain into these islands of information. That is the biggest gap in the supply chain today. That we got to structurally replace with something better. So it is, what's very interesting, it's the very structure of how the supply chains have been built that actually is causing the very problem we're experiencing today, which is this notion of frictions and inefficiencies and delays in how information is being shared across the multiple parties in the supply chain.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything about the current environment in particular? I'm talking, of course, about the coronavirus pandemic as well as the economic problems that the world is facing today. Anything about this situation that makes it even more uniquely challenging than any other time?
No, it's a great question, and the answer to that is absolutely, for a number of reasons. So that all come back to two major factors: demand variability and supply variability. You obviously have a greater amount of demand variability. We were talking yesterday about the fashion retailers looking at what's going to sell over the holiday period, right? Nobody knows. So you have a high degree of demand variability that you got to deal with. On the other side, you have the supply variability. Which factories are going to be up and running? How do you run the orders? How do you schedule the shipments? How do you manage the interface in the middle, which is your inventory locations and inventory levels across the board? So this coronavirus situation has created an intense amount of anxiety due to the variability of both demand and supply, which is a very rare factor in the world of supply chain, to have both being highly variable and unpredictable. So the answer to that question is you got to create more visibility through the end-to-end supply chain. You need to become more proactive. You need to be able to not only sense all the events in the supply chain in real time, but be able to respond to them in real time. Because again, you're not going to solve the problem by thinking you're going to improve demand forecasting accuracy or improve the predictability of your supply plans. Inherently, the market has created now so much variability that what you're going to have to do is a much higher degree of sensing and responding in real time by sharing the digital signal across yourself and your supply chain partners.
You just used the word sharing, and it strikes me that essential to making these continuous supply chains work is the ability to share information and data on a real-time basis throughout your supply chain. Is there a challenge? Is it difficult sometimes getting your suppliers upstream and your customers downstream to share with you the necessary information on a real-time basis?
Yeah, so first of all, let me address the first point you made. Yes, it is absolutely critical to solve today's problems, to instrument your supply chain, to have real-time visibility of all the events, inbound and outbound, how you manage your supply chain inbound with your suppliers, how you manage your supply chain outbound with your customers. And make sure that all those events are mapped to a single definition of the data on a single network platform that allows all the parties on the platform to share that same information, same process, same KPIs across all nodes and all tiers in the supply chain. That is absolutely critical to the ability to remove the variability and be able to address the unpredictable events in real time, proactively, to be able to ensure that your supply chain remains optimized regardless of which event might occur.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. Number two, how do you motivate the customers and the suppliers to participate? I think it's a very good question. Every time we work with a company, depending on whether we look at implementing and optimizing their inbound supply chain or their outbound fulfillment supply chain, we always work with them on the talk track about what's in it for their customers, what's in it for their suppliers, right? There's got to be some benefits for the suppliers to join the platform, to join into this, sharing of the information, and same thing for the customers. So, for example, on the inbound side, what's very critical to understand is that the suppliers can greatly benefit from sharing the demand and the supply data with their customers, having a greater degree of predictability, not only in terms of the demand and the production planning, but also in terms of invoicing and payment. What if we can implement a single platform that allows a shipper to manage the flow of orders, shipments, invoices, and payments with their supply base to be able to optimize cash flow between themselves and their suppliers in real time? So that's a benefit we can deliver to the suppliers. The second thing on the customer side, the benefit would be, how about being able to provide a real-time view of the outbound shipments to the customers? How about being able to tell them whether a shipment is going to be delayed and what we're going to be able to do collaboratively with them to resolve that particular issue? So proactive alerting of supply chain disruptions from you to your customers provides the customers with significant benefit. And that's why we believe that's a great benefit for them as well. So again, the question goes back to what's in it for your suppliers, what's in it for your customers, and articulate that with the customer we're dealing with to make sure we onboard the suppliers and the customers to the platform.
You know, Bernard, to a large extent, there is a way in which this conversation we're having right now could have been the exact same conversation 10 years ago or 20 years ago, talking aspirationally about the need for a continuous supply chain.
Right.
But I suspect one different thing from now versus then is this: you use the word digital. Is that necessary? Is it digital technology? Is automation, non-manual processes, is that what's going to make this finally happen, as opposed to us wishing it would happen for decades?
Right. I think you absolutely use the right word. Digitization can have different meanings for different people. It's essentially removing all the frictions, right? When you go from analog to digital, what do you mean? You mean that you make the information available in real time to all the parties in the supply chain so that they can make the most optimized decisions. And technology now allows us to do that. That technology was not available 20 years ago. It has matured over the last 20 years in such a way that today we can actually onboard inbound and outbound supply chains on a single network platform that allows all the parties in that supply chain to share that information, whether we're talking about forecasts, plans, inventories, orders, shipments, payments, invoices, based on a single canonical representation of the data, single representation of the workflow, single security model across all the parties on the network, in such a way that now you can truly digitize that information. Single representation of the data, the process, used by all in real time to optimize the supply chain.
All right, let's take a couple minutes to talk about Infor specifically. Infor is a venerable company. You guys have been around for a long time, but give me a snapshot of how the company has evolved over the years since its inception to compared with what it does today.
Right. So yes, Infor was created in the early 2000s and quickly became a larger company by way of acquisitions. We're now about a $3.4 billion company. A few months ago, we became a wholly owned subsidiary of Koch Industries, which is phenomenal for us as a software company because we've got the backing of one of the largest industrial companies in the world, which is very much willing to invest in transforming the world of enterprise software, especially with the focus on supply chain management. So we're thrilled to have the opportunity to work with as a subsidiary of Koch. That's important to understand. From a supply chain perspective, we obviously have the benefit of being one of the top leaders in the supply chain management space worldwide. And we are going to market with a very transformative agenda around how we help companies transform, digitize, and optimize their supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And we do so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, let's talk more specifically about the present, though. How can you, as a company, help your clients or your customers get through these difficult times? What specifically are you doing in that area? How can your solution help?
Yes, can you still hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so what we do specifically is that Infor has the ability to leverage its solution called Infor Nexus, to leverage Infor Nexus as that single instance, multi-enterprise, multi-tenant cloud solution to digitize, optimize, automate supply chains, whether it's inbound or outbound. So the way we do this when we talk to a particular customer is we're able to look at the problem they're trying to solve, the business outcomes they're trying to reach. And we basically upload or onboard their entire supply chain onto Infor Nexus, whether it's against suppliers and carriers on the inbound side or customers and carriers on the outbound side. And we allow for that information to be shared digitally, mapped to a single canonical data model, single security model, single representation of the workflows, so that we bypass these items of information. We basically, what we do is we create a system of engagement that connects to all the systems of record within the enterprise or across enterprises to enable that information to be synchronized and harmonized across the entire network, which again allows the company itself as a shipper or its customers, its suppliers, its carriers to make optimized decisions. One shipment, one order, one forecast, one invoice, one payment at a time, to ensure that, again, from a digital perspective, the information is leveraged to optimize the end-to-end supply chain. So that's the unique selling proposition that Infor brings to market. Mm-hmm. Leveraging also its other assets in supply chain, whether it's warehouse management, supply chain planning, or its ERP suites, to ensure that we can deliver an integrated workflow from planning to execution to sense and respond in a closed loop, real-time digital workflow.
Well, Bernard Goor of Infor, I want to thank you so much for giving us insight into the creation of the continuous supply chain, as well as some information about Infor itself. Thanks very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.